Okay, it's Friday morning, the 22nd of July, 1994, and here are a couple more thoughts for the Alter Ego program. One of them is to talk about the relationship of the mainly obstacle character as it applies to real life, and to state that with any relationship that exists between two people will fall into one of four categories on any particular issue. The first category is dynamic relationships in which they're opposed to what you're doing. The second would be companion relationships in which they're agreeable to what you're doing. The third would be a dependent relationship in which they don't care so much about what you're doing, but they require you in order to do something else. And the fourth kind of relationship is no particular relationship at all. Now, obviously, we go into the comment about each of these being positive and negative, the positive dynamic being opposition, the negative dynamic being opposition, the positive dynamic relationship being synthesis, and the positive companion relationship being that whatever one does turns out to assist the other, although it doesn't have to be intentional. And the negative one is that whatever one does turns out to undermine the other, although that is also not intentional. Then the dependent relationship that's positive is one in which two people together complement each other and form a unified effort towards a unified purpose. And the negative kind of dependent relationship is where one person feels incomplete without the assistance of the other, and therefore they are required in order to get anything done. Now, the fourth relationship, which we don't talk much about, also has a positive and negative aspect. And the positive aspect is that the relationship is the same as everyone else's. In other words, that there's no special relationship that exists. The negative relationship is that there's no relationship at all. Now, you'll find that out of all four of them, pretty much men and women will kind of agree on the three of them. In terms of the companion relationship being positive and negative, they'll both definitely agree. And in terms of the dependent relationship, because of the way I described it, it has a bias. But you'll find that basically they will disagree, because true love that we feel when our heart swells up for a woman is when you have a dependent relationship where you require the other person for meaning in your life. And that becomes a positive relationship. Whereas for a man, that becomes a very negative relationship, because it means that they are not self-sustaining, they are not self-sufficient, and they have to then protect something. They have to keep it. They are obligated to, or they lose a part of themselves. So that's going to be reversed between the positive and negative on the dependent relationship between male and female. And in the dynamic relationship, that's going to appear to be all negative to a woman, probably. Now, I haven't worked this out completely, so I want some other thoughts on this from our budding group of theorists here. But that may appear to be all negative in terms of the being in opposition to things, regardless of whether that leads to a synthesis of something better or it's just tearing each other down. And that will appear probably positive towards men. Now, keep in mind, when we're talking about positive and negative, we're really talking from a K-based view, where we're looking at things being useful or not useful, beneficial or not beneficial. We're not looking from the right-minded view, talking about whether they feel better or not. And that's why if we start applying the right-minded view of women to some of these categories, the positive and negative nature that we've looked at will change. When we go down to the no special relationship area, this again has, I think, maybe a reverse of the positive and negative for male and female in the other direction, because for women, having no special relationship is something that is negative. You want a special relationship. And having no relationship at all is also negative. So it ends up almost like you're going to have dependent and companion as being both positive, perhaps, in all of their forms for women, as I think it out now, and perhaps then Oh, it's one of those complex ones. Okay. Chris will know what I'm talking about. On some of the complex ones, you have to look at it kind of sideways. You can't just say it flips 180 degrees. When one's positive, the other's negative. When one's negative, the other positive. Sometimes that works out. Other times, you have, from one view, it's a negative and a positive, a negative and a positive, a negative, a positive, a negative, and a positive for all four pairs. For the other group, for right-minded, in this case, two of the pairings will appear completely positive, and two of the pairings will appear completely negative. So let's work this out a little farther. All of the chain that I went through in describing the positive and negative pairings, that's appropriate to the male perspective. And so whoever's transcribing this should take a moment to do a little more than just what I'm saying and make a list, a chart, a table, to be precise, of the pairings of all four pairings, and which ones are positive and which ones are negative from the male perspective. And then we need to make a table underneath that and show from the female perspective, call it T-boss or right-minded or whatever you'd like. We have to make the pairings and show that instead of one of each kind of pair being positive and the other one being negative for each of the four pairings, that the a whole set of pairings is positive or negative for right-minded, meaning that dynamic pairings are simply negative, completely negative, as well as the fourth category, no special relationship, meaning that there is no relationship or that the relationship is the same as any other. That is negative, because without a relationship there is no meaning for right-minded. However, for dependent relationships, both kinds, they're viewed by right-minded as being positive, meaning that if you are not complete unless you have someone else, that is positive. And also, if you are, this is a dependent relationship, and if you are in the what appears to be the positive dependent relationship for men, which is that you work together to complement each other, that is also positive for women. So women are going to see both of those dependent relationships as positive, and they'll also see both companion relationships as positive. Here's an explanation as to why. If you have the positive companion relationship where when one does something it benefits the other one unintentionally, then that's certainly positive for women as well. But when you have someone who does something and it unintentionally hurts the other one, that is also positive, maybe ranging down towards neutral, but it's on the positive side because it was not intended. Quite simply, no harm was intended, so you can't really blame the person. And if it's you that's getting shoveled on, then that puts you in the supportive position where you're saying, here's somebody who's trying to do something, and it generates this toxic waste, and I'll deal with the toxic waste so they don't have to worry about it and they can continue with what they're doing. So you can see that the view is quite askew between the left and right-minded. So this little part of theory just came into to being here as we were talking, and now that we've documented that, we need to continue that thought back to the main and obstacle character and say that one of those relationships is going to exist on a particular issue between any two people, and as a result, you're going to find that communication is going to be important, not just based on what the objective relationship is, but on how each of the participants to the relationship views it. In other words, excuse me, if one is viewing it as a companion and the other is dependent, or one is positive and the other is negative, there'll be a difference in communication, especially between men and women. And as a result, information does not pass the way it ought to. Everyone is going to put into their own context and describe the meaning for themselves of what they see based on their point of view. And in fact, there can be 2 points of view that equally explain an entire series of events because the points of view are intrinsically different and assign different meaning to what happens. And so it's important to try and classify which point of view you have and which point of view your opposing partner has in order to determine how they're going to see it. And this is something that the Dramatica engine can do. When you answer some questions about the main character and you answer some questions about the obstacle character from your point of view, it can then turn around and create the obstacle character from the obstacle character's point of view and then run a comparison between the two and see subjectively how each one would see the situation as the main character of their own story, and then print out for you exactly how they're seeing it, exactly how you're seeing it, the differences that lie between the two of you, and what things need to be addressed in order to shift that difference. You can try things. You can try what-ifs. What if we do this? What if we do that? Does it have a detrimental or a beneficial effect? And in fact, ultimately the engine will allow for a series of changes to be made, much as if one by one you were setting priorities on the story engine and then unlocking other things. It will allow you to unravel the differences between you, as opposed to going for the quick fix where everything is done holistically, which may not even be possible, and except in a very few cases is probably not possible. Anyway, this is the way alter ego can work in those differences. Now, we want to also go on in terms of the objective-subjective view, talking about a second topic here for alter ego, which is something that happened with Mindy. When you go to the doctor and you're trying to get help from the doctor, all that we just said about character relationships is going to come into play and mean that some things that are very important to you as being negative symptoms that are bothering you will hold no meaning or seem to be positive to the doctor that you're explaining it to. And this will be different depending on whether you're male or female and your doctor is male or female. It's going to set up different relationships. And in fact, you could generate with alter ego a chart to show that if your doctor is male or your doctor is female, the areas in which you can best communicate, because just because you happen to be female and your doctor's female, that means that you share the same blind spots, and that's just as dangerous as having yourself be female and your doctor male, or vice versa, and having different blind spots where communication is not really occurring. Because the communication you're going to give your doctor is going to partly have subjective reporting and partly objective reporting. You'll be reporting items that have actually occurred, events that have occurred, that would be reported the same way in terms of what had happened by anyone who saw it. But the emphasis that you put on the event, which is your symptom, the emphasis that you put on the event is going to differ completely depending on whether you are, which one of these pairing relationships you anticipate, and also whether you're male or female. This is specifically looking at the male-female aspect here. So in communicating with the doctor, where that differential, when you're talking about very personal things, is important, forget for a moment about the common thoughts people have about being more or less comfortable with somebody of the same or different gender in describing your symptoms at a personal level, which ones you'll talk about, which ones you won't because of the social pressures. Start thinking about, if you were completely open and we got all that out of the way, what would still stand in the way of communication as a result of being male or female from the pairings that we just talked about. Now take it a step farther for medical and look at the objective-subjective nature of what's going on. Mindy described to me for the last few weeks that occasionally she got this terrible pain in her stomach, and she'd call me up at the office and tell me how much it hurt. And I would try to describe, well, have some Coke or have some crackers, or just sit down and rest, or try not to be doubled over, and all these things. Call me if it gets really bad. Are you going to throw up or something? And it turns out that yesterday she actually did throw up from this terrible pain in her stomach. And so today I was considering taking her to the doctor. This last night, she came into the room and said she had this terrible pain. She was almost doubled over from it. And I said, wait a minute, where exactly is this pain? And she put her hand way at the top, up at the abdomen. And I thought, that's not the stomach. I said, wait a minute, let me ask about the pain itself. Is this pain a sharp pain? Is it more of a soreness? She says, more of a soreness. I said, could it be kind of a burning sensation? She said, yeah. I said, okay. It was heartburn, nothing more than heartburn. But because of her subjective view of it and her lack of experience with other heartburn cases, she described it as a pain, generic, in her stomach, generic. And as a result of it, we were all trying to deal with something she had eaten or this or that. And in fact, she had acid indigestion so bad that she had thrown up yesterday. So I gave her one Rolaids. She chewed it up, swallowed it, and 2 minutes later she was fine and hasn't had the problem since. From now on, I'll leave those around, and if she has that pain, she can chew one of those up and she'll be fine. So the point is that if you go to your doctor and you're trying to explain what your symptoms are, the doctor is schooled in the objective view, according to quote-unquote objective Western thought, or as they say now, Western thought world as opposed to Western world thought. The doctor is schooled in that. Plus the doctor has the benefit of a wealth of experience, seeing many, many, many cases. But that wealth of experience has led them to come to certain conclusions based on their point of view as a male or female character about the meaning of what they see. And the moment that they move out of their culture by talking to someone who hasn't had the same upbringing or life experience, the moment they talk to someone who is of a different gender, the moment that they talk to someone who's of a different age, the moment they talk to someone who's of a different temporal culture, meaning there's the culture of the 60s, the culture of the 70s, depending on where you grow up, which sets frameworks of your mind and accepts different givens. The moment that that happens, which is going to be true with almost every patient they see, unless they have an identical upbringing and gender and age as the doctor themselves, they're not going to be seeing things the same way the patient's going to be seeing them. And so, doctors may wish to be training themselves using these alter ego techniques to prepare a questionnaire that allows them to question not what has happened, but question what does the patient actually mean, and to do it using the story engine, to ask questions that can be approached more dynamically, so that instead of trying to look at the Western concept of what's the problem, they try to look at the mental relativity concept of how are things going. And when you start looking at how are things going, then that subjective view can be expressed and documented into the engine, and that can then lead to structural choices that will narrow down the options and allow the doctor to zero right in on the nature of the real problem. So as a medical analysis tool for doctors, alter ego is very valuable. And for the initial users of our program, everyone who's going to be reading our book and using it, preparing a checklist of items for them that they may wish to take to a doctor when they want to describe their symptoms. Creating an overlay guided tour of Dramatica that would be a medical template for use with the program, so that when they are having some problem, it won't tell them what their disease is, like some of the home expert systems in medicine do right now, especially on CD-ROM with interactive choices. It won't say anything about the medical, but it will pinpoint how to describe their symptoms in the most objective way possible, so that it frees the storytelling, takes that away from the story form, and allows them to express the story form in a more clear manner. Now we have to caution that because doctors are used to patients talking in a subjective mode, they're going to size up every patient and say, this person is Spanish, this person is black, this person is gay, this person is a woman, and they're going to say, okay, as a result of that, click, 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 however many of these apply, I overlay all these templates, and therefore I'm going to filter what I hear through that. And if suddenly you start talking objectively to your doctor, or more objectively, based on a real appraisal of the symptoms through using alter ego, the doctor is now going to get a warped view, because they're going to still have that template in place, and they're going to be compensating for things that aren't there. And the better the doctor, the worse their diagnosis will be using alter ego, until they become aware that you're presenting an objective appraisal. Because they're going to be, as a good doctor, if they're a very good doctor, they will be able to compensate for all of these real differences in subjective opinion. And when they're given a subjective opinion, they'll be able to get a pretty good idea of what's going on objectively, because they've trained themselves to do that. Unfortunately, most of the doctors I have encountered have not spent a lot of time trying to investigate the differences in perception of symptoms between them and their patients. And as a result, this may not be an issue that crops up often or to a great degree, but still it should be noted that if you just jump right in, it's not going to necessarily be a good thing. It might actually obscure your diagnosis for your doctor. And so if you have a doctor where you suspect they might be well-versed in other opinions and get to you always feel like they kind of know you, you may not want to use this at all because they're doing just fine. But if you want to use it, be sure you tell your doctor you're using it, because if you tell your doctor that you're using it, they can then see what you've got, see how you've gone about it, and perhaps shed their preconceptions of how you're going to be telling them about your symptoms whenever you are using this objective mode. Keep in mind, however, that if you show up after that at your doctor's and you've come a couple times with this objective mode, and one time you have something that you just go in without running it through alter ego, and you start telling them the symptoms and they've gotten used to you being objective, then if you're now telling them subjectively, they're going to still think you're objective, and that's going to obscure your treatment because you stopped using it. So these are dangers that can occur. It's always best to be able to tell your doctor if you're using a different way of describing your symptoms than you've used before if they're used to you.